6 months later, Sarah Chen stood before the assembled faculty and students of the Galactic Diplomatic Academy, preparing to deliver her thesis presentation. The grand auditorium was packed with beings from dozens of species, all waiting to hear her final project on integrated command theory, military and diplomatic applications in multi-species conflict resolution. Sarah no longer felt the paralyzing anxiety that had characterized her early academy days. Instead, she felt the familiar calm confidence that came with thorough preparation and genuine expertise. She had spent months developing her thesis, combining her military experience with the analytical framework she had learned from her classmates and professors. Distinguished faculty and fellow students, she began, her voice carrying clearly throughout the auditorium. Today I want to share how military tactical thinking can enhance diplomatic problem solving, and how diplomatic principles can improve military effectiveness. She activated the holographic display behind her, showing a complex diagram that mapped the parallels between battlefield tactics and negotiation strategies. My thesis is that both military command and diplomatic negotiation involve managing multiple parties with competing objectives under conditions of incomplete information and time pressure. Dean Morthak, an imposing Saurian who led the Academy's Strategic Studies program, leaned forward with obvious interest. Commander Chen, can you provide a specific example of how military tactics might apply to diplomatic situations? Sarah smiled slightly. Absolutely. Consider the concept of tactical flexibility, maintaining multiple options while committing to a specific course of action. In military operations, this means having backup plans ready while executing your primary strategy. In diplomacy, this translates to keeping alternative negotiation paths open while pursuing your preferred outcome. She manipulated the holographic display to show a real diplomatic scenario. Last month, I was asked to consult on the trade dispute between the Andromedan Collective and the Centauri Federation. Traditional diplomatic approaches had reached an impasse because both sides were focused on maximizing their individual gains. Professor Mindbridge's three bodies spoke in unison. How did military thinking change the approach? I applied the military principle of objective analysis, Sarah explained. Instead of asking what each side wanted, I asked what each side actually needed to maintain their essential interests. This revealed that their core requirements were not mutually exclusive. They were simply being presented in ways that appeared incompatible. She highlighted specific elements on the display. The Andromedans needed to demonstrate strength to their domestic constituencies, while the Centaurians needed to show economic pragmatism to theirs. A pure military approach would have focused on power projection to achieve dominance. A pure diplomatic approach kept trying to find middle ground on their stated positions. So what did you do? Asked Vexhai, her academic advisor. I proposed a solution that gave each side a victory in the area that mattered most to them, while making acceptable concessions in areas that were less critical to their core interests. The Andromedans got favorable terms on resource extraction rights, which they could present as a major diplomatic victory. The Centaurians got enhanced technology sharing agreements, which boosted their economic position. Kessia, who was in the audience with Sarah's other suitemates, spoke up. But how did you convince them to accept what were essentially tactical compromises? That's where diplomatic theory proved essential, Sarah replied. Military commanders are used to giving orders and having them followed. But in diplomacy, you can't simply command agreement. You have to create conditions where all parties choose to accept the proposed solution because it serves their interests. She changed the display to show communication flowcharts. I learned from Professor Mindbridge's classes that different species process negotiation information differently. The Andromedans respond well to formal hierarchical presentations, while the Centaurians prefer collaborative discussion formats. So I presented the same solution to each side using their preferred communication style. Dean Morthak nodded approvingly. And the results? Both sides accepted the agreement within 48 hours, Sarah reported. More importantly, they both felt like they had achieved significant victories, which strengthened their relationship for future negotiations. She moved to the next section of her presentation. But the integration works in the opposite direction as well. Diplomatic principles can significantly improve military effectiveness, particularly in multi-species alliance operations. Sarah described how she had applied diplomatic theory to a recent joint training exercise between Terran, Volcari, and Aquarian forces. Traditional military doctrine would have established a unified command structure with standardized procedures. But diplomatic analysis revealed that each species had different concepts of authority, different decision-making processes, and different concepts of tactical honor. "How did you accommodate such fundamental differences?" asked a crystalline professor whose name Sarah still struggled to pronounce correctly. "I created a flexible command structure that allowed each species to contribute their strengths while respecting their cultural constraints," and Sarah explained. "The Volcari excel at long-range strategic planning, so they coordinated overall mission architecture. The Aquarians are superb at rapid adaptation, so they handled real-time tactical adjustments. Humans managed logistics and resource allocation. The display showed combat effectiveness statistics. The result was a 40% improvement in mission success rates compared to traditional unified command approaches. Each species felt valued for their unique contributions, which improved cooperation and reduced friction." Graxtar raised his massive hand. "Sarah, what was the most important thing you learned during your time at the Academy?" Sarah paused, considering the question carefully. "I learned that strength and weakness are often context-dependent. My difficulty with casual social interaction, which I saw as a personal failing, was actually a result of applying military communication protocols to civilian social situations. When I learned to recognize different communication contexts and adjust my approach accordingly, I became more effective in both military and diplomatic settings." She looked around the auditorium, making eye contact with beings from dozens of different species. "More broadly, I learned that true expertise isn't about mastering a single skill set. It's about understanding how different types of knowledge can be combined to solve complex problems. My military training taught me to make decisions under pressure with incomplete information. Academic study taught me to analyze problems from multiple perspectives before taking action. Together, they create capabilities that neither approach could achieve alone." Professor Mindbridge stood up. "Commander Chen, your thesis makes a compelling case for integrated training programs. Do you have recommendations for how military and academic institutions might better prepare future leaders?" "Yes," Sarah replied confidently. "I recommend mandatory cross-training programs where military officers spend time in academic environments, and where academic researchers spend time in operational military settings. Not to turn soldiers into scholars or scholars into soldiers, but to give both groups experience with different analytical frameworks and decision-making processes." Dean Morthak consulted his notes. "What about the practical challenges? Many military officers might struggle with academic environments, just as many academics might find military settings intimidating." Sarah smiled, thinking about her own initial experiences at the Academy. "The key is recognizing that struggle is part of the learning process. I was terrified of classroom discussions when I first arrived here, but that discomfort forced me to develop new skills and perspectives that ultimately made me a better commander." She gestured toward her suitemates in the audience. "I was fortunate to have colleagues who were willing to help me navigate unfamiliar territory. Any successful integration program would need strong mentorship and support systems." As she concluded her presentation, Sarah felt a deep sense of accomplishment. Not just because she had successfully completed her academy program, but because she had proven to herself that she could excel in environments that had once seemed impossible to navigate. When the presentation ended, the auditorium erupted in applause from multiple species, each expressing approval in their own cultural manner. Sarah had not only graduated from the Academy's program, she had demonstrated that humans could contribute to galactic civilization in ways that went far beyond military prowess. Later that evening, at the graduation celebration, Admiral Morrison approached Sarah with a smile. "Commander, I have new orders for you." "Yes, sir?" "The Galactic Defense Council has approved the creation of a new position, Director of Integrated Strategic Operations. It's a joint military diplomatic role that requires someone who can think like both a commander and an ambassador." "Congratulations, Admiral Chen." Sarah felt a moment of shock at the promotion, followed by a warm sense of rightness. "Thank you, sir. I accept." As the celebration continued around her, Sarah found herself surrounded by her academy friends and colleagues. Graxtar was telling stories about pack leadership to a group of fascinated Terran officers. Kessia was engaged in. Sarah returned to the academy 3 days later to find herself something of a celebrity. News of the Raider operation had spread throughout the galactic academic community, and her innovative tactical approach was being discussed in strategy classes across multiple species educational institutions. She discovered this when she walked into Professor Mindbridge's interspecies communication theory class to find a dozen additional students from other programs seated around the room. The usual pre-class chatter died down as she entered, and she felt the familiar weight of attention settling on her shoulders. "Ah, Commander Chen," Professor Mindbridge announced, their three bodies speaking in perfect unison. "We were just discussing your recent operation. Would you mind sharing your perspective on how interdisciplinary collaboration influenced your tactical decision-making?" Sarah took her usual seat, but this time she didn't feel the paralyzing anxiety that had characterized her previous class participation. She had something concrete to discuss, actual experience rather than theoretical concepts. The traditional military approach would have focused on direct engagement. She began, her voice steady and clear. Identify the threat, assess relative force strength, engage with superior firepower. But applying analytical frameworks from different disciplines revealed patterns that pure tactical analysis missed. She stood and moved to the front of the classroom, unconsciously adopting the confident posture she used when briefing her crew. Psychological profiling suggested the raiders were using pack hunting strategies rather than military tactics. Predator behavior analysis indicated that the obvious engagement was likely a distraction from the real objective. Resource optimization. Theory helped identify the most probable regrouping location. A student Sarah didn't recognize, a tall, blue-skinned Andorian, raised her hand. "But how did you integrate these different analytical approaches in real time? Each discipline has its own methodological frameworks." Sarah considered the question carefully. "I think the key was accepting that each perspective was incomplete by itself. In military analysis, we're trained to find the correct solution, but this situation required finding the best available solution using all relevant information, even if that information came from unfamiliar sources." Professor Mindbridge's middle body leaned forward with obvious interest. "Can you elaborate on that distinction? Correct versus best available?" "Military doctrine assumes that sufficient intelligence and proper analysis will reveal the optimal tactical approach," Sarah explained. "But in the Raider situation, I was working with incomplete information and time constraints that made perfect analysis impossible. So instead of trying to find the theoretically correct solution, I had to synthesize multiple imperfect analyses into a workable strategy." Zena, the Aquarian student Sarah remembered from previous classes, spoke up. "That sounds like what we do in diplomatic negotiations. No one has complete information, and every party has different priorities and constraints." "Exactly," Sarah said, feeling a spark of understanding. The Raider operation was essentially a negotiation where each side was trying to achieve their objectives while preventing the other side from achieving theirs. Professor Mindbridge's three bodies exchanged one of their mysterious looks. "Class, this is an excellent example of cognitive flexibility, the ability to apply learned concepts across different domains. Commander Chen, you've just described diplomatic theory using military terminology." Sarah felt a flush of satisfaction. For the first time in an academy classroom, she had contributed something valuable to the discussion, rather than simply enduring it. The class continued with other students sharing their own experiences with interdisciplinary problem solving. Sarah found herself actively listening and occasionally offering observations. When a crystalline student described resource allocation, challenges in their homeworld's mining operations, Sarah suggested applying military logistics principles. When a Felinian student discussed predator-prey dynamics in ecosystem management, Sarah drew parallels to tactical pursuit scenarios. After class, several students approached her with questions about military decision-making processes. Sarah discovered that explaining military concepts to non-military audiences required her to think about her own expertise in new ways. She had to translate technical jargon into more accessible language and find analogies that made sense to beings with completely different cultural backgrounds. Commander Chen, Lyra Shan, the celestial being who had been her partner in the proximity exercise, approached as the crowd of students dispersed. "I wanted to apologize for our previous conversation." "Apologize?" Sarah was confused. I asked you about your feelings and emotional connections to your homeworld, Lyra Shawn explained. I didn't realize that such questions might be difficult for someone with your background. Sarah considered this. In her previous academy classes, she had interpreted such questions as evidence of her own social inadequacy. But now she was beginning to understand that communication difficulties could stem from cultural differences rather than personal failings. You weren't wrong to ask, Sarah said carefully. I just processed that kind of information differently. When you asked what it felt like to grow up on Earth, I focused on the quantifiable aspects because that's how I'm trained to evaluate environments. But you were asking for something more subjective. Yes, Lyra Shawn agreed. Emotional and spiritual connections to place. Sarah thought about the hill behind her childhood home, where she used to watch military transports and dream of commanding a starship. There was a place I used to go when I needed to think, she said slowly. A hill overlooking a spaceport. I would sit there and watch ships taking off, imagining myself as their commander. Lyra Shawn's luminous eyes brightened. That sounds like a sacred space, a place where your spirit connected with your destiny. I never thought of it that way, Sarah admitted. But yes, I suppose it was. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Sarah's suitemates. Graxtar's massive frame dominated the hallway, while Kessia moved with her characteristic feline grace. Harmony's crystalline form pulsed with what Sarah had learned to recognize as excitement. Sarah, Graxtar rumbled enthusiastically. We heard about the Raider engagement. The tactical analysis was brilliant. Our collaborative approach worked even better than we hoped, Harmony chimed in. The Academy administration is discussing incorporating interdisciplinary tactical analysis into the curriculum. Sarah felt an unfamiliar warmth at their enthusiasm. These beings weren't just congratulating her on a successful military operation. They were celebrating their shared contribution to something larger. I couldn't have done it without your insights, Sarah said, and meant it. Your different perspectives revealed aspects of the situation that I never would have considered. That's what makes a good team, Kessia observed, her tail swishing with satisfaction. Different strengths that complement each other. As they walked back toward their dormitory, Sarah found herself engaged in the kind of casual conversation that had seemed impossible just days earlier. They discussed the tactical implications of the Raider engagement, but also shared observations about their other classes, compared notes on different professors' teaching styles, and even engaged in some good-natured speculation about academy gossip. Sarah realized that somewhere in the process of explaining her tactical decisions to her classmates, she had stopped thinking of them as intimidating academic superstars and started thinking of them as colleagues, people with different expertise who could help her understand complex problems from new angles. That evening, they gathered in their common area to work on individual assignments. Sarah was reviewing case studies for her galactic conflict resolution class when Graxtar looked up from his own work. Sarah, can I ask you something about human military psychology? He said. Of course, Sarah replied. In your species' historical military conflicts, how did commanders maintain morale during extended campaigns with uncertain objectives? Sarah set aside her data pad and considered the question. It varied depending on the specific conflict and cultural context, but generally successful commanders focused on achievable intermediate goals rather than abstract strategic objectives. Soldiers needed to see concrete progress toward something they could understand and value. Interesting, Graxtar mused. That's similar to pack leadership dynamics, but with some important differences. They spent the next hour discussing leadership psychology across different species and contexts. Sarah found herself drawing connections between military command, structures, and the social hierarchies her suitemates described from their own worlds. For the first time since arriving at the academy, Sarah went to sleep feeling like she belonged somewhere. Not because she had changed who she was, but because she had learned to apply who she was in a new context. Her military training and tactical mindset weren't limitations that prevented her from succeeding in an academic environment. They were tools that, when combined with her classmates' different expertise, could solve problems that none of them could address alone. Tomorrow would bring new classes and new challenges. But Sarah was. The bridge of the UES Redemption hummed with controlled tension as they approached the Kepler Nebula. Sarah stood at the center of it all, watching multiple tactical displays while her crew prepared for what could be the most important engagement of her career. Sensor readings are limited due to nebula interference, Lieutenant Torres reported. "We're flying partially blind, Commander." "Expected," Sarah replied. "Maintain course toward the projected intercept coordinates. Communications, any word from the diplomatic convoy?" "Negative, Commander. They're maintaining communication silence as per standard security protocols." Sarah nodded, her mind racing through the possibilities. If her analysis was wrong, she would have pulled the Redemption away from legitimate search and rescue operations for nothing. If she was right, they were about to face an unknown number of raiders who had specifically chosen this location for its tactical advantages. "Commander," her tactical officer called out, "I'm picking up energy signatures bearing 27 Mark IV. Multiple contacts, definitely not natural phenomena." "How many?" Sarah asked, moving to the tactical station. "Hard to determine with the interference. At least 6 vessels, possibly more." Sarah studied the sensor data, applying the analytical techniques her Academy suitemates had demonstrated. Instead of just looking at the military implications, she tried to think like Graxstar. What would pack hunting psychology suggest about raider positioning? Like Kessia, how would a predator set up an ambush in this environment? "They're not where I expected them to be," she murmured. "Commander?" Her first officer, Commander Williams, asked. "Traditional military doctrine would place the ambush force directly along the convoy's projected route," Sarah explained, her fingers dancing across the tactical display. "But these raiders are thinking like hunters, not soldiers. They're positioned to herd their prey into a specific area." She highlighted several positions on the display. They want the convoy to detect the obvious threat and alter course. The real ambush is waiting wherever the convoy thinks it's safe to run. "So where's the real ambush?" Williams asked. Sarah closed her eyes, trying to apply Harmony's resource optimization principles to the problem. If you were a raider with limited ships and a specific target, how would you maximize your chances of success while minimizing exposure? "There," she said, pointing to a seemingly empty region of space. "The convoy will try to loop around the detected raider positions. That's where the main force will be waiting." "Commander, should we warn the convoy?" Communications asked. "Not yet," Sarah replied. "If we break communication silence, the raiders will know their plan is compromised. They'll either scatter or alter their strategy. We need to catch them in the act." She turned to her tactical officer. "Prepare all weapon systems, but keep them powered down. I want us to look like just another search and rescue vessel until we're in position." The next 20 minutes felt like hours. The Redemption moved through the nebula using passive sensors only, trying to remain undetected while closing on the predicted ambush location. Sarah found herself thinking about her recent Academy classes, particularly Professor Mindbridge's lessons about cultural communication differences. Raiders weren't military forces. They operated according to different principles with different goals and constraints. Understanding their perspective was as important as understanding their capabilities. "Contact," Torres announced suddenly. "Multiple vessels decloaking. They're moving to intercept something." "The convoy?" Williams asked. "Must be," Sarah confirmed. "All stations, battle stations. But maintain communication silence for now." The main display lit up with tactical information as the Redemption sensors painted a clearer picture. 8 raider vessels were moving in a coordinated pattern, surrounding what appeared to be a small diplomatic convoy. The convoy consisted of 3 ships, 2 escorts and 1 transport vessel. "The convoy's trying to break away," the tactical officer reported, "but they're outgunned 3-1. Sarah watched the engagement develop, her mind automatically calculating firing solutions and tactical options. But something felt wrong about the scenario. The raiders were being too aggressive, too visible. "This isn't right," she said suddenly. "Commander," Williams looked confused. "Look at their formation," Sarah pointed to the display. "They're exposing themselves to unnecessary risk. Professional raiders would disable the escorts quickly and capture the transport with minimal damage." This is too chaotic. She thought about Kessia's analysis of predator behavior. Successful predators were efficient, not wasteful. They took what they needed with minimal energy expenditure. "Communications, scan for additional vessels in the area," Sarah ordered. "Full spectrum analysis." "Commander, we're supposed to maintain stealth until we're in position." Williams reminded her. Change of plans, Sarah replied. This engagement is a distraction, just like the earlier raids. The real operation is happening somewhere else. Her suspicions were confirmed moments later when communications reported, Commander, I'm detecting a second convoy approximately 50,000 kilometers from here. Different vector, minimal escort. Sarah felt pieces clicking into place in her mind. The diplomatic convoy we're watching is a decoy. Professional security operation. They sent out 2 convoys simultaneously. The raiders are attacking the obvious target while the real prize slips away unnoticed. So what do we do? Williams asked. Sarah looked at the tactical display, weighing her options. The decoy convoy was in real danger, but saving them wouldn't accomplish the mission. The real convoy was vulnerable but didn't know it was being hunted. Split the difference, Sarah decided. Tactical, prepare a full spread of torpedoes, maximum yield. Communications, prepare a general broadcast on all frequencies. Commander, that will blow our cover completely, Williams warned. That's the point, Sarah replied. Fire torpedoes full spread. Target the raider formation attacking the decoy convoy. Communications, broadcast the following message on all frequencies. This is Commander Sarah Chen of the UES Redemption. Any raider vessels in this system have 30 seconds to withdraw before I hunt you down one by one. Ma'am? Communications looked uncertain. Do it, Sarah ordered. The Redemption's torpedoes streaked through space, impacting the raider formation with devastating effect. 3 raider ships were destroyed outright, and the others broke off their attack on the decoy convoy. Sarah's broadcast echoed throughout the system, and she could see the immediate effect on the tactical display. Multiple previously hidden contacts began moving, raiders abandoning concealed positions and heading for the system's edge. Commander, Chen's reputation precedes her, Williams observed with satisfaction. That's what I was counting on, Sarah replied. Sometimes psychological warfare is more effective than actual combat. But her plan had a second phase. While the raiders were fleeing her reputation, she was analyzing their escape vectors using the techniques her Academy suitemates had taught her. Pack psychology suggested they would regroup at a predetermined rally point. Predator behavior indicated they would choose a location that offered multiple escape routes, but still allowed them to observe potential targets. Plot an intercept course for the following coordinates, Sarah ordered, transmitting a location that her analysis suggested would be the raiders' rally point. How do you know they'll be there? Williams asked. Because that's where I would go if I were a raider leader trying to salvage something from a failed operation, Sarah replied. They'll want to regroup, assess their losses, and potentially attempt a grab on the real convoy if they think they can do it quickly. 20 minutes later, the Redemption dropped out of warp at the coordinates Sarah had calculated. Waiting for them were 6 raider vessels clustered around what appeared to be a command ship. Impressive, the lead raider transmitted. You found us, Commander Chen, but you're outnumbered 6-1. Actually, Sarah replied, you're surrounded. On cue, 3 additional Terran Defense Force ships dropped out of warp at strategic positions around the raider formation. Sarah had used her reputation and the raiders' predictable psychology to herd them into a trap. Admiral Morrison sends his regards, Sarah announced as the raider ships found themselves caught in a crossfire position with no escape routes. The raiders surrendered without firing a shot. Later, as the Redemption escorted the captured raider vessels back to Centauri Prime, Commander Williams approached Sarah's command chair. How did you know Admiral Morrison would send backup? He asked. Sarah smiled slightly. I didn't. But I knew the raiders would expect me to be alone, and their tactical planning would be based on that assumption. Sometimes the most effective strategy is to be exactly what your enemy expects you to be, right up until the moment you're not. She paused, thinking about her recent academy experiences. A very wise professor recently taught me that different perspectives can reveal solutions that wouldn't be apparent from a single viewpoint. Today I use tactical analysis, psychological profiling, predator behavior study, and resource optimization theory to solve a problem that pure military doctrine wouldn't have addressed effectively. Williams looked impressed. Is that the kind of thing they're teaching you at the academy? Among other things, Sarah replied. It turns out there's more than one way to win a battle. As they approached Centaur, Sarah was analyzing case studies for her interspecies conflict resolution seminar when the station-wide alert began broadcasting throughout Kepler Station. The sound was unlike any military, Klaxon, she had heard, a complex harmonic progression that somehow conveyed urgent danger in a way that transcended individual species' auditory processing capabilities. Students began emerging from their quarters, uncertainty evident in their various forms of body language. Sarah immediately activated her personal communication interface and connected to the Terran Defense Network. Her military instincts engaged automatically. Assess the threat, gather intelligence, prepare for action. What's the situation? Blue Current asked, their jellyfish-like form pulsing with agitated bioluminescent patterns. Their atmospheric suits' mobility systems were running at higher power levels, indicating significant stress. Before Sarah could respond, Sisleth burst into their common area, her emerald scale showing the darker patterns that indicated alarm in serpentine physiology. Pirates, she announced grimly. Marauders from the void reaches have attacked 2 Institute research vessels in the past 90 minutes. Sarah's hands moved across her interface without conscious thought, accessing tactical databases and communication protocols. What's their composition? Attack patterns? Response assets deployed? Unknown fleet strength, Iron Whisper rumbled as he entered, his massive form tense with barely controlled aggression. The raiders are using some form of stealth technology that's interfering with long-range sensors. They're hitting fast and vanishing before security forces can respond. Sarah frowned at her displays. Something was fundamentally wrong with this scenario. Kepler Station was one of the most heavily protected installations in this sector. 4 different species maintained defensive fleets in nearby systems, and the Institute itself possessed sophisticated early warning networks. This doesn't follow standard pirate operational patterns, she muttered, her tactical mind automatically analyzing the available data. Pirates operate with surgical precision to maximize profit while minimizing risk. Attacking Institute research vessels brings massive retaliation from multiple species. The cost-benefit analysis doesn't support this kind of high-profile target selection. Her podmates focused on her with new attention. This was the first time they had seen her speak with complete confidence and authority since her arrival. So what do you believe is actually occurring? Blue Current asked. Sarah accessed more detailed intelligence reports through her military clearance. This is misdirection, she concluded after several minutes of analysis. The real objective isn't the research vessels. They're using these attacks to manipulate defensive force positioning. Manipulate how? Cecileth inquired, her reptilian features showing intense concentration. By drawing patrol units away from their normal coverage areas, Sarah replied, her fingers dancing across tactical projections. If you know standard defensive patterns, you can create. Sarah Chen sat in the 3rd row of Professor Mindbridge's interspecies communication theory class, her posture rigidly straight, hands folded precisely on her desk. Around her, 63 students from 47 different species engaged in animated pre-class chatter. The sound was overwhelming, a cacophony of clicks, hums, chirps, and growls that her universal translator worked frantically to process. Professor Mindbridge was a collective being, a species that existed as multiple entities sharing one consciousness. Today, 3 of their bodies were present, one tall and thin with blue skin, one short and round with green scales, and one that appeared to be made entirely of living metal. All 3 spoke in perfect unison, creating an eerie harmony effect. Today we explore the concept of cultural miscommunication, the 3 bodies announced together. We will examine how different species interpret the same information through their unique cultural lenses. Sarah pulled out her datapad and prepared to take notes. In military briefings, information was presented clearly and concisely. Instructions were given, acknowledged, and followed. She expected this class to operate similarly. She was wrong. To begin, let's discuss the human concept of personal space, Professor Mindbridge continued. Human student Chen, would you please share your perspective on appropriate interpersonal distance during conversation? Sarah felt every eye in the room turn toward her. Her throat went dry. Personal space is... It depends on the situation, sir. Please elaborate, one of the professor's bodies encouraged. What factors determine appropriate distance? Sarah's mind raced. This seemed like such a simple question, but she had never actually thought about it analytically. In military settings, personal space was determined by regulation and practical necessity. In civilian life, she had so little social interaction that she had never developed intuitive rules. Military regulations specify minimum safe distances for various activities, she said carefully. For tactical discussions, 3 feet minimum to prevent classified information from being overheard. For parade formations, 18 inches between personnel. For combat situations, but what about casual conversation? Interrupted a student Sarah recognized as Xena, an Aquarian with flowing tentacles instead of hair. When you're just talking with friends? Friends? Sarah felt heat rising in her cheeks. The truth was, she didn't really have friends. She had subordinates, superiors, and colleagues. The concept of casual conversation was as foreign to her as breathing underwater. That would depend on the relationship dynamics and the nature of the information being exchanged, she managed. Professor, Mindbridge's 3 bodies exchanged a look that somehow conveyed amusement despite their alien features. Perhaps we should approach this differently. Student Chen, how close would you stand to someone you consider a close friend during an informal conversation? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah could feel the weight of expectation from her classmates. Some species were naturally tactile. She had observed Graxtar casually touching his friend's shoulders during conversation. Others, like the crystalline harmony, seemed to maintain considerable distance even during intimate discussions. I haven't, Sarah started, then stopped. The admission that she didn't have close friends felt too personal to share with a room full of strangers. I prefer to maintain standard diplomatic distances in most situations. A ripple of whispered conversation swept through the classroom. Sarah caught fragments through her translator. So formal. Typical military mindset. Do humans not form emotional bonds? Interesting, Professor Mindbridge noted. Class, we see here an example of cultural conditioning. Humans who pursue military careers often develop communication patterns that prioritize efficiency and hierarchy over emotional connection. This can create challenges when they attempt to engage in diplomatic or academic settings. Sarah felt like a specimen being examined under a microscope. The professor wasn't wrong exactly, but the clinical analysis of her social deficiencies felt deeply uncomfortable. Let's try a practical exercise, Professor Mindbridge announced. Students, please form pairs with someone from a different species. You'll have 10 minutes to conduct a conversation about your homeworlds, paying careful attention to how proximity affects your comfort levels. The classroom erupted into movement as students began pairing off. Sarah remained seated, watching as natural groupings formed around her. She had no idea how to approach someone for this kind of exercise. In military training, partners were assigned. Here she was expected to initiate social contact voluntarily. Commander Chen, a melodious voice spoke beside her. Sarah looked up to see a tall, ethereal being with silver hair and luminous purple eyes. I am Lirishan of the Celestial Harmonies. Would you be willing to partner with me? Sarah nodded, grateful that someone had approached her. Lirishan moved with fluid grace, settling into the chair beside Sarah with movements that seemed almost like a dance. Your home world, Lirishan began. Tell me about the place where you grew up. Earth, 3rd planet in the Sol system. Gravity is 9.8 meters per second squared. Oxygen, nitrogen atmosphere. Surface temperature range from -40 to +50 Celsius depending on location and season. Sarah recited the facts automatically. Lirishan tilted her head slightly. Those are impressive technical specifications. But what was it like to live there? What did it feel like to be young on Earth? Feel like? Sarah struggled with the concept. It was adequate. Standard human development parameters. I attended educational institutions and participated in required physical fitness activities. Did you have favorite places? Beautiful landscapes that moved your spirit? Sarah thought about this. There had been a hill behind her childhood home where she used to go when her parents fought. She would sit there and watch military transports passing overhead, dreaming of commanding a starship. But how did you explain that kind of personal detail to a stranger? There were acceptable recreational areas, she said finally. Lirishan's expression was unreadable, but Sarah sensed disappointment. Around them, other pairs were engaged in animated conversations, sharing stories and laughing together. Sarah could hear fragments. Xena describing the underwater cities of her world. Graxtar explaining the great forest councils of his people. My world is called Harmony's Tell, Lirishan offered, perhaps trying to model the kind of sharing she hoped for. It orbits a binary star system, so we experience 4 different types of daylight throughout our rotation cycle. During the violet dawn hours, the entire landscape seems to sing with resonant frequencies that touch your soul. Sarah tried to imagine what that would be like, but her mind immediately began analyzing the practical implications. That must create challenges for agricultural scheduling and circadian rhythm regulation. Lyra Shawn blinked slowly. Yes, there are practical considerations, but mostly we experience it as beautiful, as transcendent. Before Sarah could respond, Professor Mindbridge called for attention. Excellent work, everyone. Now let's discuss what you observed about proximity preferences across species. Students began sharing their experiences. The insectoid Hivari preferred close contact, often touching their conversation partner's arms or hands. The reptilian saurians maintained greater distances but used complex tail movements to convey emotional undertones. The gaseous nebulans had to be careful not to accidentally merge with their partners during intense discussions. Student Chen, Professor Mindbridge said, "What did you observe about your own proximity preferences compared to your partner's?" Sarah realized she hadn't paid attention to distance at all. She had been so focused on trying to answer Lyra Shawn's questions appropriately that she had completely missed the point of the exercise. "I didn't notice significant variations," she admitted. "Ah," Professor Mindbridge said, and Sarah could hear volumes of meaning in that simple sound. Class, this illustrates another important point. When individuals are experiencing social stress or uncertainty, they often become so focused on content that they miss crucial nonverbal communication cues. Sarah felt her face burning with embarrassment. She was being used as a negative example in front of the entire class. The brilliant military commander who could track dozens of enemy ships simultaneously couldn't manage to monitor the distance between herself and one conversation partner. As the class continued, Sarah retreated deeper into herself. She took careful notes on everything Professor Mindbridge said, analyzing the theoretical frameworks being presented. The academic content was fascinating. Different species had evolved completely different approaches to social bonding, conflict resolution, and information exchange. But understanding the theory and participating in the practice were entirely different challenges. Every time Professor Mindbridge called on her, Sarah felt like she was failing some test she didn't know she was taking. When class finally ended, students filed out in small groups, continuing their conversations from the exercises. Sarah packed her datapad carefully and headed for the door alone. "Commander Chen," Professor Mindbridge called out. Sarah stopped, wondering what additional embarrassment awaited her. "A moment of your time, please," the three bodies said in unison. Sarah approached the front of the classroom, her military bearing. The Galactic Diplomatic Academy sprawled across 3 floating platforms above Centauri Prime's capital city. Sarah Chen stared up at the magnificent structures from the landing pad, feeling distinctly out of place. The architecture was a blend of dozens of different species' aesthetic sensibilities. Flowing Aquarian curves merged with sharp Volcari angles, while bioluminescent Zelani gardens cascaded down crystalline Thex walls. Students of various species moved across the connecting bridges with easy familiarity. Sarah watched a group of tall, blue-skinned Andorians gesticulating enthusiastically, while discussing something with a pair of insectoid Hivari. Nearby, several gelatinous Blobrothi were engaged in what appeared to be a heated debate with some reptilian saurians, their translator devices working overtime to bridge the communication gap. Sarah adjusted her dress uniform and checked her schedule display for the 3rd time. Orientation began in 20 minutes. She had arrived on Centauri Prime 3 days early, ostensibly to acclimate to the local time cycle, but really because the thought of rushing into such an unfamiliar environment made her nervous. "Commander Chen?" A melodious voice spoke behind her. Sarah turned to find a tall, elegant being with silver skin and large, dark eyes approaching. The being wore the Academy's distinctive purple and gold robes, and Sarah's military training immediately cataloged the subtle differences that marked this as a member of the ethereal species. "I am Counselor Vexhai, your assigned academic advisor," the ethereal said, extending a hand in the human gesture of greeting. "Welcome to the Academy." "Thank you," Sarah replied, shaking the offered hand. The ethereal's skin felt surprisingly warm, contradicting the cold appearance of the silver coloring. "I trust your journey was comfortable?" Vexhai asked as they began walking toward the main academy building. "Yes, the transport was adequate," Sarah answered, then immediately wondered if she should have said more. Was that response too brief? Too formal? In military briefings, efficiency was valued, but civilian conversation seemed to follow different rules. HFY seemed unbothered by the short response. The academy can be overwhelming at first. Students come here from over 200 different worlds, representing 87 distinct species. The diversity of perspectives is one of our greatest strengths, but it can also present unique challenges. They entered the main building, and Sarah was struck by the scale of the interior. The central atrium rose 30 stories, with balconies and walkways creating a complex network of paths between different levels. Students gathered in small groups throughout the space, their conversations creating a constant, low hum of activity. Your dormitory assignment is on the 15th level, HFY continued, leading Sarah toward a transport tube. You'll be sharing a suite with 3 other students in the Advanced Strategic Studies program. The Academy believes that close interaction with peers from different backgrounds enhances the learning experience. Sarah's heart sank. Roommates. She had specifically requested private quarters in her application. But apparently that wasn't standard procedure. The thought of making small talk with 3 strangers every day for an entire year made her palms sweat. The transport tube carried them upward smoothly, offering glimpses of different levels through transparent walls. Sarah saw laboratories filled with incomprehensible equipment, lecture halls where professors addressed students of wildly different physiologies, and recreation areas where the simple act of playing games required multiple species to find common ground. Here we are, HFY announced as they stepped off at the 15th level. The corridor was lined with doors marked with symbols from various species' writing systems. Sarah's room was marked 15C in standard galactic common script. HFY pressed his palm to the door sensor, and it slid open to reveal a spacious common area. 3 beings were already present, and all conversation stopped as Sarah entered. She felt their eyes evaluating her, and fought the urge to stand at attention. Everyone, this is Commander Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Force, HFY announced. Sarah, meet your suite mates. A massive bear-like creature with golden fur stood first. Graxtar of the Ursine Collective, he rumbled in accented galactic common. I study military psychology and pack dynamics. Next was a sleek feline being with spotted fur and predatory eyes. Dr. Kessia Nightwhisper, representing the Felinian Federation. My specialty is xenobiology and chemical warfare applications. The third was perhaps the most alien of the group, a crystalline being that seemed to emit a soft internal light. When it spoke, the voice came from a translation device attached to its base. I am designated as Harmony of Crystal Song. I study resource allocation and logistics theory. You may call me Harmony if the full designation is inconvenient. Sarah stood there for a moment, acutely aware that they were all waiting for her to say something. In military introductions, rank and function were sufficient. But this felt different, more personal. I'm Sarah, she finally managed. I study strategic planning, and I command a fleet. An awkward silence followed. Graxtar's ears twitched in what might have been amusement, while Kessia's tail swished with barely contained energy. Harmony's crystals pulsed in a slow, steady rhythm. Well, HFY interjected smoothly, I'll leave you all to get acquainted. Sarah, your first class is tomorrow at 800 hours. Interspecies Communication Theory with Professor Mindbridge. I'm sure your suite mates can help you find the lecture hall. After HFY left, the silence stretched uncomfortably. Sarah looked around the common area, noting the mix of furniture designed to accommodate different physiologies. There was a standard human-style chair, but also a nest-like structure for Kessia, a heavy-duty platform for Graxtar, and what appeared to be a resonance chamber for Harmony. So, Graxtar said eventually, you're the human who destroyed the Zephyrian fleet at Kepler 442. Sarah nodded, unsure how to respond to what sounded like a statement rather than a question. That was impressive tactical work, Kessia added, her voice carrying a purring undertone. The Felinian military academies are studying your battle records. Your use of gravitational wells to funnel their ships into kill zones was particularly elegant. Thank you, Sarah said, feeling slightly more comfortable discussing military tactics. The resource efficiency was remarkable, Harmony chimed in. You achieved total victory while expending only 14% of your available munitions. Most commanders would have used overwhelming firepower from the beginning. Sarah found herself actually smiling slightly. Ammunition conservation is important when you're operating far from supply lines. Every shot has to count. Is it true you never lost a battle? Grakstar asked, leaning forward with obvious interest. I've never lost an engagement, Sarah confirmed, though I've only been in command for 3 years. 3 years, Kessia mused. Most species require decades to produce fleet commanders. Human military advancement is remarkably rapid. We don't have decades, Sarah replied. When humanity joined the galactic community, we were behind in technology and experience. Fast promotion was necessary for survival. The conversation continued for another few minutes, focused on military topics, and Sarah began to relax slightly. When they talked about warfare, logistics, and strategy, she felt confident. These were subjects where her knowledge was extensive and her opinions well-formed. But then Grakstar asked, "What do you do for fun?" And Sarah felt the familiar panic return. Fun? She repeated as if the word was foreign. Recreation, hobbies. What do you enjoy when you're not commanding a fleet? Kessia clarified. Sarah stared at them blankly. The truth was she didn't really have hobbies. When she wasn't on duty, she usually studied tactical manuals, reviewed battle simulations, or worked out in the ship's gym. She had never learned how to just relax. I read, she said finally, which was technically true. What kind of books? Harmony asked. Military history, tactical theory, strategic analysis. Another silence fell over the group. Sarah could practically feel their assessment of her changing. In their eyes, she was probably just another war-obsessed human with no interest beyond fighting. Well, Grakstar said eventually, classes start tomorrow. We should probably all get some rest. As her suitemates dispersed to their individual rooms, Sarah stood alone in the common area, wondering how she was going to survive a year of this. In space, she knew exactly who she was and what she was capable of. Here, surrounded by brilliant beings from across the galaxy, she felt like a fraud pretending to be something she wasn't. The worst part was knowing that tomorrow, she would have to do it all over again. Commander Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the UES Redemption, watching the final moments of the Battle of Kepler 442. Around her, the bridge crew worked with practiced efficiency, their movements sharp and precise. Through the massive viewport, the debris field that had once been the Zephyrian invasion fleet drifted silently in the void. Casualty report, Sarah said, her voice cutting through the controlled chaos of the aftermath. Minimal losses. Commander, Lieutenant Torres replied, not looking up from his console. 3 fighters damaged, no fatalities. Enemy fleet completely neutralized. Sarah nodded, feeling the familiar weight of command settle on her shoulders. At 28, she was the youngest fleet commander in human history, and battles like this one proved why the Terran Defense Council had fast-tracked her promotion. In 3 years of active service, she had never lost an engagement. Her tactical mind could process battlefield information faster than most AI systems, and her ability to inspire troops in combat was legendary. The Zephyrians had learned this the hard way. They had expected an easy victory when they attacked the human colony world of New Geneva. Instead, they had found Commander Chen and her rapidly assembled defense force waiting for them. The battle had lasted 6 hours. The Zephyrian defeat had been absolute. "Ma'am," Communications Officer Park spoke up. "We're receiving a message from Admiral Morrison on Luna Base." "Put it through to my ready room," Sarah said. She turned to her first officer. "Commander Williams, you have the bridge. Begin recovery operations." Sarah walked to her private quarters, feeling the eyes of her crew following her. They respected her, she knew. Some even looked at her with something approaching awe. In battle, she was everything a commander should be. Decisive, brilliant, fearless. It was everywhere else that things became complicated. The holographic display in her ready room flickered to life, revealing Admiral Morrison's weathered face. He was smiling, which was unusual enough to make Sarah unconsciously straighten her posture. "Outstanding work, Commander," Morrison said. "The Zephyrian defeat at Kepler 442 is already making waves throughout the galaxy. Intelligence reports suggest 3 other hostile species are reconsidering their expansion plans into human space." "Thank you, sir," Sarah replied, keeping her voice steady and professional. "Which brings me to why I'm calling," Morrison continued. "The Galactic Diplomatic Academy on Centauri Prime has extended an invitation to you. They want you to attend their Advanced Strategic Studies program." Sarah felt her stomach clench. The Galactic Diplomatic Academy was prestigious, certainly, It was where the galaxy's future leaders learned to navigate the complex web of interspecies politics and diplomacy. But it was also exactly the kind of environment where Sarah felt most uncomfortable. "Sir, I'm not sure I'm the right candidate for diplomatic training," she said carefully. "My strengths lie in tactical command, not social interaction." Morrison's smile widened. "Commander, that's exactly why you need to go. The galaxy is watching humanity now. Your victories have made you famous across dozens of star systems. The Diplomatic Academy wants to study what makes human military leaders so effective. But more importantly, we need you to learn how to represent our species in peacetime as well as war." Sarah remained silent, which Morrison correctly interpreted as reluctance. "Chen, I know this isn't your comfort zone," the Admiral said, his tone becoming more personal. "I've read your psychological evaluations. Social anxiety, difficulty with casual conversation, preference for structured military environments. But you're brilliant, and brilliance finds a way to adapt." "What about my fleet command?" Sarah asked. "The Redemption and her crew will remain under your command. The Academy program is designed for active officers. You'll split your time between studies and continuing your military duties. Think of it as an expansion of your skill set." Sarah stared at the holographic display for a long moment. In space combat, every decision had clear parameters. Enemy ships had specific capabilities. Weapons had known ranges, and tactical manuals provided proven strategies. But diplomacy, social interaction, the subtle dance of words and gestures that seemed to come so naturally to others, these were foreign territories where she had no reliable maps. "How long is the program?" she asked finally. "1 standard year. You'll be studying alongside the brightest minds from across the galaxy, military leaders, diplomats, scientists, philosophers. The Academy believes that cross-species understanding is the key to preventing future conflicts." Morrison leaned forward slightly. "Commander, you've proven that humans can outfight anyone in the galaxy. Now we need to prove we can outthink them too. And frankly, you're one of the few people I trust to represent our species in such a high-profile setting." Sarah considered this. Representing humanity was a responsibility she couldn't take lightly. Her victories in space had already changed how other species viewed humans. Perhaps learning to navigate diplomatic waters was simply another type of battlefield, one where the weapons were words instead of plasma cannons. "When does the program begin?" she asked. 2 weeks. "You'll have time to arrange for your first officer to handle routine operations while you're in classes. The Academy is very accommodating to military schedules." Sarah nodded slowly. "I accept the assignment, sir." "Excellent. Commander, I know this won't be easy for you. But remember, you've faced down entire fleets without flinching. A classroom full of aliens shouldn't be more intimidating than that." As the communication ended, Sarah found herself staring out the viewport at the stars beyond. Morrison was wrong about one thing. A classroom full of aliens discussing abstract concepts, making small talk, navigating the unwritten rules of social interaction, that was far more terrifying than any enemy fleet she had ever faced. In space combat, her instincts never failed her. But in conversation, those same instincts seemed to abandon her entirely. She could inspire 1,000 soldiers to charge into certain death, but asking someone about their weekend plans felt like an impossible challenge. Still, she had accepted the assignment. In 2 weeks, she would trade the familiar bridge of her starship for the uncertain terrain of the galaxy's most prestigious academic institution. The girl who had struggled to make friends in her hometown on Earth was about to represent all of humanity on the galactic stage. The irony was not lost on her.